Okay, so what we're going to do is fetch the data for the products on GraphCMS. So if we go on to GraphCMS, and it's this link here, app.graphcms.com, and if you click through to here, so all we need to do is log in. So continue with Google, and then I'm just going to log in with my Google account. So this has its own authentication as well. And you can also do this with the Firebase authentication as well with Google. So what I'm going to do is skip to overview for now. And then here you can select the project that you want to use. And we are going to get started with the commerce shop. So if we click get started here and click add project, we just need to set a region first of all. So I'm in the United Kingdom. So if I just click this one and click add project, so essentially this will configure all the projects. And as you can see there, it said the tech stack was Next.js with Tailwind CSS. So as this is being set up, we do need to install GraphQL. Essentially, GraphQL is a method of fetching data. As you would with a REST API, you would fetch data from an API, but it would fetch everything from the API. And what GraphQL does is you can choose and pick and select what data you want back from the API, which in turn has a lot of benefits, such as increasing performance and less network requests. There are tons of benefits with GraphQL, which we can look into, but what we are going to do is install GraphQL, and we are going to use a client called Apollo Client. So you can search this on Google. So if you type in GraphQL install, like so, and if we scroll down, it says here, get started with an Apollo server. We don't want that one, but if we go in the documentation here, we can use Apollo Client. So if we scroll down, and as you can see, there are performance benefits such as caching and persisted queries, but we want to go on fetching data overview. You can read this further, but there are tons of benefits on fetching data with GraphQL as opposed to a REST API. And what I'm going to do is search for Apollo docs in here, and then we are looking for the client. So here, and if we click React and get started, first of all, it says setup. So what we need to do is we need to install Apollo client and GraphQL. So it is yarn add Apollo client and GraphQL, which we are doing here. So as we did previously with the Redux wrapper, we need to wrap our application in an Apollo client, as you can see here. So now that everything is installed, I want to do yarn run dev in here like so. And because we have installed a new third-party application, I'm going to go in lib and create a new folder named GraphQL in here. And in here, I'm going to create a client.ts, which is what this is telling me to do in the documentation. So in my client.ts, it says here to configure a client. So if we copy this, paste this in here, and also copy this one and paste this at the top. We also need to export the client. So export default of client like so. So this will be passed in our provider. And then this link here is the incorrect link. So we need to change this. And the way to find this out is if we go in product settings and then access on here and click API access. So now we have a few endpoints in here. What we want to do is get access to the content API. So if I click copy on here, and then in my URI, I'm going to paste this one in here like so. What I also want to do is replace this URI. So here I'm going to paste in link, which is equal to new HTTP link, passing in my URI. So if I copy this and paste this in here, and then also delete this URI, and I want to pass in use get for queries as true. So we are only fetching in this build. I now also need to do control space on the HTTP link. So import that in also. And then we don't need the rest of this, as we will create a new file for our queries later on. So if I save and go into here, we have configured the Apollo client steps of initializing it. And now it says we need to do a query. So we will do that later on. And we also need to connect to the React application, or in our case, the Next.js application. So quite simple to do. We wrap the application in an Apollo provider and pass in the client that we have just made here. So if we just copy this and go into my underscore app.tsx and wrap the provider there, all I need to do now is close this off after my theme provider, and we just need to control space our client, which we have just created, and also control space for our Apollo provider. So now we should have access to the Apollo provider on a global level on our application. So now it says if we scroll down, fetch data with use query. So we can have access to use query, and then this is how we fetch the data with the use query hook, where we define a query such as get locations. And if we scroll down, we are using the query to get locations. So essentially we are getting all of the data specified in this query here, and then we are returning the loading state, the error state, and the data state. So the benefit of this is we don't need to set state or create a use state in our application, or even a use effect to fetch data as you would normally do with a use effect. So what this does is essentially it just returns the data for you that you want to fetch, and then we have access to that and we can map the data accordingly. So in our case, we will be mapping our products onto the page, and therefore we're not using any React hooks such as the use state or use effect. So now if we go into our playground, so in here, we want to almost test out the queries that we want to make. So in my API playground, if I expand this out, and what we can do is if we delete everything and we find products, so as you can see here, we can get access to retrieve a single product, or we can find all products. So in this case, it's the products here. And what I want to do is get access to the ID. So if I click ID, like so, and also the name and the price. As you can see here now, it's quite handy, and what I'm doing is I'm fetching only the data that I want. So for now, if I do products of ID, name, and price and press play, as you can see here now, the data that I was talking about earlier, it is returning data.products, which is an array, and it's returning all of the products that I need in here. So what I'm going to do, if we copy this, and in my GraphQL folder here, I'm going to create a new file named query.ts, like so. And what I need to do now is import GQL, which is something we need to call in order to fetch this query that we have here. So GQL from Apollo client, like so. And now I want to create a constant to get all of the products. So this is my query here. I want to fetch all of the products. So the convention normally is uppercase. So get underscore products with an S is equal to GQL, like so. And then in here, we want to pass in the query. So if we paste this in, and I want to rename this to get products because it's more specific. And in here, we pass in the products like so. So now if I save, I also want to export this. So export get products like so. So now if I save, what I have done is I have got my products and I want to expand this further. So if I copy this and replace this with what I have, so I want the ID, the name, the description, price. The images itself has its own object, so we can go in further. If I want more information, if I press enter and control space, you can see a list of all the associated properties that we can access on here. So this is quite handy if you don't know what you're fetching. But for now, I'm just going to leave that as it is. If I expand this further and press play, now you can see I'm getting access to quite a lot of information, which is quite handy for me, as now I have specified the images, the price, the description, name, and so on. So if I paste this in here and replace it with my other products and save, we have now defined our first query, which is get all of the products from our CMS. And then if we click into this documentation over here, we can also create a use query hook and get all of the products in here like so. So now that I have defined the get products here in my query.ts, what I want to do is create my own custom hook to fetch all of the products, and then I can reuse that custom hook in my home page to render out all of the products. So what I need to do is in my components folder, I'm going to create a new folder in here called hooks. And in hooks, I'm going to create a new component called use products. So this is a custom hook that we are creating. And as you would do RAFCA, like so, of used products, and I am exporting that. And all I want to do is, instead of returning anything here, I'm going to copy what it says here. So if we copy this and paste that in here, essentially we are using the use query hook, which is correct. And now I want to import the use query hook from Apollo client. So that's correct. I'm getting access to the loading, error, and data. So if we copy this and return this in here, and then the query that I want to now pass in is in our query TS here, which is the get products. So if I copy that and paste that in instead of get locations and import this in also, and now if I save all, and we can delete this one as well, we have created our first custom hook, which is fetching the get products data using GraphQL, and then we are also returning the loading, error, and data here. So now we just need to use this use products on our home page. So if we go into our pages and index.ts here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete all of them, as what we are going to do now is get access to our use products hook. So that will be const loading error and data is equal to use products. So we now need to control space and import this in. And if I go back in here, I want to now console log the data that I am getting back. So if I do that, and actually if I do loading error and data and see what is being returned in my console, so inspect in console, you can see false undefined object. So loading is false, error is undefined, and then data is the object. And as you can see here, we are getting an array of products in data. So essentially what we can do now is add some guard clauses into our home page. First one is if is loading, return the loading text. If is error, return the error text. And now we have access to data. So what I want to do with my data is return my product. So in here, in our JSX, we can do data.products.map like so. For each product, we want to implicitly return the product component. So if we move this up and save, and we just need to add some extra parentheses in here. And now, as you can see, it's returning 7 different components, or the length that is returned from data.products. So what I also want to do is add a extra check in here to say if data is true and is not undefined, and data.products.map, and add optional chaining in like so. So now we are protecting the map. So if I save, and now what I want to do is console log the product. So if we do console log of data one more time as data, and now if I save, we are getting products here. So what I want to do is for each product, I want to render the product ID as the ID. The title will be the product.name. So product.name like so. The price will be the product.price like so. And then finally, the image will be the product.images, the first index of that, because it's an array .url. So if we go into this one, there's only one image that we want. We want the first image and we want to get the URL for it like so. The rating is not being passed in. We could add the rating into our products themselves in our content over here and then add in a rating. But for now, what I will do is just pass in the number 4 so that all the products have the number 4 being rendered out on the page. So now if I save all, and now I go into my local host, and as you can see now, all of the products are being rendered on the page here. And we are getting them from our Graph CMS, and they are being fetched using GraphQL also. So that is working correctly.